Welcome to the Invention Stories podcast, where we share stories of inventors who turn their idea into a product. Please visit our website at www.inventionstories.com. And now, from the Invention Stories podcast World Headquarters Studios in Morro Bay, California, is our host, Robert Baer.
Welcome to the Invention Stories podcast, brought to you by the Socket Saver. My name is Robert Baer, and thank you for joining us. You're listening to episode 37 of the Invention Stories podcast with Jerry Bessa, CEO of iPowerUp, and his invention, the Fusion 2 cell phone case. Part 1. The Fusion 2 is the world's first solar power case that uses the world's most efficient solar cells to charge your phone quickly. Jerry is running an Indiegogo campaign for the Fusion 2, and we invite you to learn more about and support this groundbreaking technology. A quick way to get there is to go to www.inventionstories.com/fusion. That's Fusion. Now we have the CEO of iPowerUp on the line from Ventura, California, so let's get started. Welcome, Jerry. Great to have you with us. I'd like to start off by asking you, what kind of kid were you? I see that you grew up in El Segundo, which is here in Southern California. What kind of kid were you?
Well, probably like a lot of kids back in the day. I mean, basically, I went to school, and whenever I could, I'd kind of sneak off and go surfing. So surfing was really kind of the pastime that I enjoyed. I actually grew up more in Orange County area, more like Dana Point and such as that, or San Clemente. So that was my first exposure to surf. And then I moved off to the South Bay area. And of course, surf wasn't quite as good, but I had opportunities there to, spend some time at the beach and surf and enjoy myself. So,
what is it about surfing you enjoyed? Because I live in a sort of a surfing community here in Morro Bay, and people are addicted to it. They love it. What do you enjoy about it?
It's a combination of things. I mean, my personal experience is that when I'm in the water surfing, it's sort of a lone sport in regards to what you do with the wave. It's secondarily kind of the freedom of being out and being able to enjoy a wave, and each wave you surf is different. So every ride you get is always a different experience. And lastly, I guess I would say it's kind of a Jesus-like experience because you're walking on water.
Nice. I can see that. Well said. Nice visual. And how about your passions in high school outside of that? Your career, it looks like you started off in electronics. Why did that appeal to you?
Actually, I did like probably most people. I worked for other companies and made other companies a fair amount of money in sales and marketing. And it really wasn't until about my late 20s that I decided I'd like to work for myself and started to challenge myself to understand the risks associated to carrying your own weight and paying yourself and struggling to try to find a way to make a living. So I wouldn't say from school to the marketplace, I really had any great ambitions. It was really more about, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know where I'm going. And, maybe we'll just try different things and see what makes the most sense. And I also married pretty early. So, that actually slowed me down from college or any further professional type field. So I just sort of gradually moved right into, if you will, sales and marketing. And that's where I kind of learned my trade in different companies, doing different things. And I learned many different fields because I did many different things to try to find what I wanted to do.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you about your first job. It was in sales. You were a salesman. Was it an actual sales job?
It was. My first job was I actually worked for a company called Photosciences, and it was called microlithography or photo photography. It's actually making integrated circuits. This was at a time when integrated circuits were not as small as they are today, but they still, like the big companies like Rockwell's and Northrop's, so they're making big defense systems, still had to have chip designs because they wanted to reduce the size of their electronics. So my first job was I worked for this company doing actually inspection. I was a quality control party, and I would inspect the circuits through microscopes for dimensional characteristics to make sure that the circuit designs actually met the specification parameters. And it was fun, but kind of boring. And I did it for about 5 months. And then I actually went to the vice president of the company and I asked him if I could go into sales. And he sort of lit up on that and said, I think maybe so. So it was a few weeks later, he called me in his office and he basically said, okay, we're going to put you in sales. I didn't realize at the time how difficult it was going to be to sell that technology. But nonetheless, that was my first entry-level opportunity to be in sales. And, it was a good pay hike, a good expense account. There was a car. There were some good bennies to it. So I liked it. And ultimately, I did okay for the company.
And what did you have to do? Did you have to go business to business? Was it cold calling? What exactly did you do?
I like outside sales, and the accounts were not that many because this was sophisticated semiconductor technology. So it was really just calling on the big defense subcontractors, as I mentioned, the Rockwells and Northrops, McDonnell Douglases, companies like that, where within their organization they had an engineering group that would actually be there designing circuits or designing their electronics for their next either defense or whatever kind of subsystem they were making for the military. That's kind of it. It wasn't overly exciting. And there wasn't like, you're going to go out and knock on a lot of doors because it was a very complex technology and it took a while to learn it. But that was my first experience in semiconductors.
Was there a lot of competition or how did you get the sale? Was it a better product or a better price? How did you make the sale?
Yeah, well, it's basically trying to develop a relationship with the party that requires the work effort or the work product. And I think for the most part, it's just, what is your requirement? Tell me what you want to do. Show me what your parameters are, and we'll quote you. It was competitive. There were other companies out there doing the same type of thing, but it wasn't as an example, it wasn't like in the retail marketplace. This was very specialized service. So it was really more about developing a relationship with the party that you're working with. Back then, you could take the engineers to lunch and, kind of wine and dine and get to know them. And I think a big part of this was personality. So if they enjoyed your company, you had a pretty good shot at getting the business as long as you were reasonably competitive in your price. And I've always been kind of a joker, so it was fairly easy to try to be personable.
That sounds really cool. It seems like you're on the ground floor of the greatest technological shift, at least in my lifetime. The computers and now the cell phones. But how did you go from that point to iPowerUp? I know I'm trying to spend about 30 to 40 years here.
Yeah, you are. Big gap there.
Okay, so let's just start from there. So you left that job, and then did you start your own business after that?
No, I had many other jobs between the time I left Photosciences and the time I actually started up this company. And you're right, there's about a 35-year spread in there. So I basically did a number of other jobs for many other companies to learn a variety of different products and technologies. And it was sort of covers the entire canvas of, what we see today in the way of product line. What I ultimately looked to do was to get into first the electronics to understand, the rule of electronics and, Moore's law and all these, and Ohm's law and all these other fundamentals. So I could understand, what's this electronics thing? Then I went after component level technology where I was selling components. That actually taught me how these components are used. Then I went after what they call power supplies. And I learned AC and DC and DC and D switching type power supplies. And I understood from that, I learned what those applications are and how those are used. And, every other product on the planet that's electronic at that time required power supplies, especially these types of power supplies, either an AC-DC or a DC-DC. So in that gap, I would just say this. I ultimately then decided, after going through a number of companies and learning experiences about all the different products and applications that I needed to understand, I reached a place where I understood how electronic products are made, why they're made, how they operate, what the technical parameters are, what the end solution is for this product to provide. Once that was clear to me, then I started actually doing my own business. And that first business was actually a contract manufacturing service. And then I actually went into Mexico and I set up a maquiladora. I realized that I knew electronics. Now I could actually build them in Mexico and do it cost effectively, if you will, over what the costs were, if you will, in the United States. So I set up a number of different operations there, and I spent about 18 years doing that in different locations in Mexico, doing both sub-assemblies as well as what they call box build. Most of what I built were power supplies because that was my specialty. I then, I would say around 2000 is when I actually started getting into alternative energies. So that's when I started focusing on, okay, I'm really kind of tired of the fundamental product line. I get it. I don't really want to be building other people's products for them and making them more money than I'm making. So I would like to make a decent wage. So I figured it's time for me to let go of that business and start working on alternative energy technology so I could create something unique and make a mark, or at least provide to the consumer a product that was meaningful and worthwhile. Unfortunately, at that time, solar was not very efficient. So, it was really kind of a discovery process, which has been my life. I always kind of go into something with about an 80% background and 20% sort of in the trenches where I have to find my way through. And if I can get to the 80% factor, the 80-20 is what I call it, then I consider to myself, okay, that's sufficient enough. I've covered 80% of where most of the areas are that I could get in trouble. There's 20% left. Let's try to work through those. But I will usually start the project once I get the fundamentals under my belt and I'm comfortable that there's something there and it can actually be a benefit to the market as well as to myself.
And now it's time for a commercial break. The Invention Stories podcast is brought to you by the Socket Saver. Do the plugs fall out of your wall sockets? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. No repairs necessary, no circuit breakers involved, no electrical knowledge or mechanical skills required. Socket Savers are inexpensive, efficient, and portable. For more information, please visit www.socketsaver.com. You know what I find interesting is that you are sharing the story, and at first you were looking at everything from a sales point of view, and then you were looking at it from really an entrepreneur's or owner's point of view, and sales being a huge component of it, and that you have to know your product so you can sell it.
Right.
I talk to a lot of inventors, and some of them have an engineering background, and it seems like they have a harder time making it because they're always trying to explain the actual product and how it works, instead of trying to explain it from a business point of view. Do you think more of your success comes from having more of a sales entrepreneur mindset rather than having an engineering mindset?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm not a degreed engineer. I'm a benchtop engineer, which means I've learned my electronics by hands-on experience. Okay? And that's how I've learned electronics. Whereas I think in the general rule, most inventors are engineers. So I come at it from a sales standpoint as far as my professionalism. And then, of course, understanding first the value add proposition and what it is that would make this product move to the market from a consumer acquisition standpoint. For me, this scenario or formula that I operate from has worked very well because, again, I have the sales and marketing background, which is probably as formidable, or maybe even back then more formidable than it was from an engineering standpoint. But today, of course, I've got those skills. So I'm enabled with, I think, kind of a blessing because I can engineer outside of the box because I'm not restricted from the fundamentals of the art, if you will. And from the sales and marketing standpoint, I've always been very good at that. So, I don't have trouble really speaking to the public or into an audience or any of that. And at the same time, I try to find the value proposition that makes the most sense. And if I don't find that, then I don't go in that direction. I just figure it's a waste of time. I've seen many companies fail for really, not necessarily thinking through how they're going to move that product to the market. Let me just say this. I think a lot of people think that it's pretty easy. Once you have invented something, I can sell it anywhere and it's not a lot of work. They're so wrong, it's not funny. There's a tremendous amount of work and it's well beyond what they can even think of. And that's what usually happens. They get involved in that side of the endeavor, and then they realize, whoa, this is well beyond what I was thinking it's going to be. And it's a hardship. So unless you have a team that has the skills already in these areas to take a product to market, most of these entrepreneurs do not. They're just small guys that built maybe a great product, but they have no idea on how hard it's going to be to take it into the market, and that's where they usually find out it's very difficult.
So it sounds like you're talking more along the lines of market research. And of course, we have now tools to help you with market research called crowdfunding. And since it started, I've always viewed crowdfunding as a market research tool with the added benefit of raising money. But I think you're absolutely right. I'm always having inventors asking me for help. And when I ask them what they've done for market research, like how are you going to sell what you make? And
Sure.
yeah, and it's like the last thing that they think of is like, well, they think if they just build it, it'll sell.
It'll sell. Yeah, that's right. It'll sell right off the shelf. Wrong. Got to get it on the shelf. I think that's the other thing about any of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and all these other crowdfunding deals is that a lot of these people, like I said, I think the formula I just laid out is pretty common practice to these crowdfunding sites, and that they have a widget, they've developed a widget, they're going to bring in a few parties, and they figure they can raise a bunch of money on here, and that money will take them to market. Well, that money will help them get to market, sure, and perhaps it'll build a product. I think the rate of failure is up there when it comes to actually deliverables from those that have done crowdfunding and have successfully reached their goals and then did not deliver a product to the market. And it could be a variety of reasons. It may just be that it's relative to the product, the materials, the technology, or maybe they're reaching a bit on the technology and they can't actually deliver the product, but thought if they had the money, they could engineer it in. I don't know. But I would add to what you were saying about crowdfunding, in my opinion, it's another vehicle to get you there. It's probably a less stressful vehicle than what it was in the past, because in the past you had to go to factoring, or you had to go to investors or investment firms or VCs. None of these people are easy to work with, and they all want a very big bite out of your company. So, crowdfunding has definitely that blessing that it offers the consumers that participate in it, or entrepreneurs. I would just say that, no matter what an entrepreneur does, if he wants to take that product to market, he just needs to know that it's going to be just as painful to deliver that product to market as it was to build it. And let me add to this. You think of, I want to go into Sam's Club because I see these pallets and all these volumes and all these great products, and there's people in there doing millions. And yeah, that's true. But in any of these big clubs, you have to operate on your own capital. They don't buy anything from you. You have to go out and raise the capital to build a product. Then you got to raise the capital, or if you will, hold on until they can pay you after you deliver the product. And then they have to sell the product. And if they don't sell the product, guess what? They send you back the product. And then you lose money, hand over fist. Not to mention everything in between that goes on when you try to build a product overseas. You still have your VAT, your taxes, your shipping, your quality control. And you have to make sure that you're clearly understood in your engineering side of the product design, so you don't get a product here that you don't want. So there's just a lot to watch out for when they're doing this business, both in the U.S. as well as overseas. And I would also just say that it's, again, I'm going to go back to it's far more demanding than most people even consider. So doing business here in the U.S. just because you got a product is no easy task. Sorry, I probably went a little further into that than I should have. But
No. That's great. That's what we'd like to share. And I think it's great because I don't think some of the inventors see all the potential pitfalls or some of the problems that come with not even just in manufacturing overseas, but just in general. They don't see the whole scope of the actual cost. There are some that you can predict, but some just kind of pop up.
That's right.
Like, I'm sure you've received merchandise and half the merchandise is done wrong and things like that.
Sure.
And not to mention customs and time being spent when it's being held up. I see you were the CEO of Marlix International from 1985 to 99, and it sounds like that was your business. And then it says you were the CEO of Genesis Electronics from 1999 to 2007, and then from iPowerUp from 2007 until today. Now, all three of those were your businesses, right?
Correct.
And so I'd like to ask you a little bit about what you did at Marlix International and Genesis Electronics, and then why did you decide to leave?
So Marlix International was basically the contract manufacturing operations in Mexico. And it was Very difficult at first to set up those operations in Mexico at that time, mainly because, you're operating in a foreign country. My Spanish was not fluent. I understood manufacturing, and so therefore I could go into an operation, if you will, as long as I had a translator with me, and I could go through their quality control and their manufacturing processes. And if they had any automation equipment, I could go through that, or through-hole equipment, I could go through that. And I could validate and verify their processing and see whether or not working with a company in Mexico would make sense. I ultimately wound up partnering with the first business, but then I started up the next two businesses in Mexico myself. It was the first one was the learning curve. The next two, I understood what had to be done. So let's just say that for me, when in the latter years at Marlex, when we went in the first two operations, we actually did quite well. We had some very large customers, and I was building a lot of volume, and it was actually very good. The downside to Mexico is that the employees will come to the borders to work for you for a period of time. And once the holidays are coming and they get their check, they leave and they don't come back. They go to the interior. So you have to bring in another 50, 60, or 100 people and train them. It's very costly. You lose money and you don't get good quality. So what I was doing basically is I started in Tijuana with the first operation. I was there for a number of years. The turnover was way too high. I moved into Mexicali for several years. It was too hot. Again, turnover way too high. And then the third operation was actually in the interior because the turnover was zero. And of course, I had an air-conditioned building, and I was doing surface mount and through-hole technology. So I had a few hundred people, and I had about 7 what they call SMT lines or Fuji lines. And I was able to maintain that operation for quite some time. The reason I quit was because contract manufacturing in Mexico during the latter years became very popular. So Selectron and Jabil Circuits and all these big companies started coming into Guadalajara, which was making it difficult for a smaller company to compete. And again, you don't make a lot of money when you're doing contract manufacturing. Margins are very tight. So it was just kind of like, I'm tired. I've done this. I've seen it. I lived the dream that I wanted to do at that point in time. So I succeeded at it. Now let's find a new dream and move on to something new, which is why then I let go of Marlex and I moved into Genesis Electronics. Now, Genesis was the beginning of the alternative energy. Probably the mistake I made there was I had a partner. But you never know when you go into these things how partnership relationships are going to work out. I would only say that it wasn't the partner that demised the business. It was more about we made a great product. It was, to give you a spin, instead of using the standard solar cells at the time, which were somewhere like maybe 4 to 6% or 7 to 8%, we went ahead and moved into space cells that were at the 20% range. And we worked with Techstar, we worked with MCore, we worked with Spectralab. Now, we didn't do a lot of business with any of them, but we tried to do the business. So what we were able to do was get some business with Techstar. We got some 20% cells. I made a holster power case at the time with the mindset that this particular power case would provide a tremendous amount of power, and it would. It was for a T28 phone, which you probably don't know about, but back then in 2000, they had candy bar phones. They were just coming out with what they called 2000, which was supposed to be the next 2G wave, okay? So they were going into flip phones, but prior to that, everything was a candy bar phone. So mindset was, let's find the slimmest phone I can so I can make a holster for it. What I found was I found a T28, which is actually a pretty slimly designed phone by Ericsson. So what I modeled was I modeled a power case or a holster around that phone that had a battery in it, that had the solar on it, and then had a fuel gauge and power management electronics and so forth. Actually made a great device. Unfortunately, at that time, the phones only sent and received. And I think you could text on some of them, including the Ericsson. That was it. So the problem I had was I was delivering from a solar standpoint about 200 milliamps, 250 to 300 milliamps per hour, which was considerably high for that time, for sure. But the users weren't having a lot of need for the additional power on the fly. mainly because they would plug in at night, they'd unplug in the morning, and they knew what their power threshold was. And when they run out of power, they just plug in again. And because it wasn't a candy bar design, mine was unique to only one phone, there wasn't a lot of calling for it. I did have some relations with Samsung and LG on their new design phones. And just about the time I started working on a design for Samsung, the .com came out and crashed. That basically put a kibosh on us raising any capital, because that was our objective at the time. We had a design element opportunity with Samsung for a particular set of phones, but there was no capital at that time to bring in. So I would just say this about Genesis. I mean, I hung in there until 2007, until my partner at the time decided that he wanted to sell the company to a penny stock company or a microcap company, I guess with the intent that they would make it grow and raise capital. I disagreed with him. So I resigned, and I let him do what he wanted with the company. Unfortunately, he did sell it to this company, and as far as I know, they tanked, and it went the way I thought it would. So all was lost there. So I waited another year, and then I started a new company, which is the one that we're talking about today, which is iPowerUp.
So what is iPowerUp?
So iPowerUp went into the marketplace as first a research and development firm to actually try to further pursue that dream of making a product that a consumer would like that would actually self-charge from solar. So in the process of designing several new models of product that were solar designed, I also went after making standard charging cases too. At that time, I think in 2008, maybe late 8 or 9, Mophie came out with a 3 case. At the same time, we had our case, but I hadn't released it to the market because I didn't have the capital to do it. So all I did was I continued to work on the solar design to be more novel and unique over the standard case design, which was just a case with a battery pack, power management, and a fuel gauge, okay, and mechanically designed around the phone. Of course, we made the cases for the designs of the iPhones and the Samsungs. In 2010 early, I decided it was okay to go to market, and I had enough money to do it. So I went ahead and borrowed some capital, and then I released the iPhone 4S model. I was fortunate enough to be able to get a business opportunity with Radio Shack at that time. So we started out with some pretty good volumes. It was very exciting, right? And we continued to support that particular effort fairly, early on for several years. At the same time, and remember, I'm learning the retail side of the U.S. business because that's not where I had a lot of sales experience or distribution experience. It was more I had learning a variety of different businesses working for others and learning technologies. So we then, after about a year, maybe 8 months after Radio Shack, we then went into Hudson News and Bookstores. And we had an opportunity with them to deliver products for their stores. I believe we were in all the stores in North America. Radio Shack, I think we were in like 2,500 or 3,500 stores there.
You've been listening to episode 37 of the Invention Stories podcast. Jerry Bessa, CEO of iPowerUp, and his invention, the Fusion 2 cell phone case, part 1. And I want to thank Jerry Bessa for being our guest today. More information can be found at www.ipowerup.com. And to visit their Indiegogo campaign, please visit www.inventionstories.com/fusion. The Invention Stories podcast has been sponsored by the Socket Saver. Does the plug fall out of your wall socket while vacuuming, drying your hair, using a power tool, or recharging your electronic devices? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. Please visit www.socketsaver.com. Thank you very much for listening today, and please tell a friend.